Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about the poem Honour Killing by Imtiaz Dharker. So we'll start by reading Honour Killing by Dharker. We'll then go through it stanza by stanza to check our understanding. I'll identify the key message of the poem and the areas in which we can explore conflict. I'll then identify some of the key linguistic, structural and poetic devices that Dharker uses that you may want to memorize and comment on in your exam. And finally, I'll leave you with a couple of post-video tasks you can do to solidify your understanding of this poem. So, our poet, Imtiaz Dharker, she was born in Pakistan in 1954. And she is still alive today at the making of this video, which is early 2023. So she's another contemporary poet dealing with issues of our time. She was born in Pakistan, but raised in Glasgow in Scotland. And now as an adult, she splits her time between London in England and Mumbai in India. So what you need to understand is that Dharker is very multicultural, very well-travelled and culturally aware. And that does come across in her poetry. So this poem was based on a real event, or inspired by a real event. And what happened was that in Lahore in Pakistan, a city in Pakistan, a woman was murdered by her own family because she asked for a divorce. Now this happened in the 1990s. So Pakistan is a predominantly Muslim country, and I believe in Islam arranged marriages are a fairly common occurrence. So this woman's parents had arranged for her to marry her husband with permission from his parents. But something was going wrong in that relationship, and this woman wanted a divorce. So she went to her family, and instead of helping her, her family murdered her. And the Pakistani Senate refused to condemn the family and charge them for murder, and instead called it an honour killing. Now, an honour killing is usually when a girl or a woman is killed by her own family for bringing shame or dishonour to their family name. This can happen through divorce, or maybe through prostituting herself, or for some other activity that the family would perceive brings shame to their family name and reputation. So this poem was born out of a really, really tragic real-life event. So here's the poem, Honour Killing by Imtiaz Dharker. At last I'm taking off this coat, this black coat of a country that I swore for years was mine, that I wore more out of habit than design. Born wearing it, I believed I had no choice. I'm taking off this veil, this black veil of a faith that made me faithless to myself, that tied my mouth and gave my God a devil's face, and muffled my own voice. I'm taking off these silks, these lacy things, that feed dictator dreams, the Mangal Sutra and the rings, rattling in a tin cup of needs, that beggared me. I'm taking off this skin, and then the face, the flesh, the womb. Let's see what I am in here when I squeeze past the easy cage of bone. Let's see what I am out here, making, crafting, plotting at my new geography. So there you have it, a 6-stanza poem, Honour Killing by Imtiaz Dharker. So what is going on in each stanza? Well, in stanza 1, we're introduced to the persona, the main character of the poem, if you will. And this persona is decidedly female. It could be Imtiaz Dharker herself, or this persona could represent all women who are oppressed by having to live up to a certain identity or having to follow certain expectations. Now, in stanza 1, the persona removes her coat, and this coat symbolises her cultural identity or the expectations her culture has put upon her. So if you're looking back to the poetic inspiration, you could argue that this coat maybe represents Pakistan and Pakistani culture. Or if you're looking at this poem being more representative of women in general, it could represent any country that maybe places identity or behavioural expectations on women and a woman wants to free herself of those. In stanza 2, the same female persona is removing a veil. Now, the veil symbolises religious identity or expectations placed on a woman by religion. So again, if we're talking about Pakistan and the Islam faith, the veil could be like a hijab that women are expected to wear, a physical cloth over their face. But if you want to sort of extend it to maybe other religions, maybe in Christianity, when you get married, there's a veil that goes over the bride's face. And by removing this veil, it's removing the religious identity and the religious expectations placed upon women. Stanza 3 has the same female persona, and here she's removing her underwear, these silks, these lacy things. Now, the underwear symbolises her gender identity and the expectations placed upon her because of her gender. And in this case, her gender is female. So the idea that she should use her body to maybe please men, and that is her function in life. She wants to remove herself from this identity and these expectations. Stanza 4, same female persona. She wants to remove her skin, her face, the flesh on her bones, and her womb. Now, these 4 things symbolize her physical appearance, her physical identity, and the expectations that may be placed on her because of the sexual organs she has in her body. The persona here wants to get rid of all these expectations. Truly, she wants to be free. She wants to be valued for who she is, maybe internally or spiritually or in her soul. She doesn't want to be limited by her physical situation. So then in stanza 5, there's a shift, a change of tone. We call that a volta, and it becomes a bit more optimistic. Here, the persona has removed all of these identities, removed the coat that symbolises culture, removed the veil that symbolises religion, removed the underwear that symbolises gender, and removed her face and flesh and skin that symbolises physical appearance. And now she's truly free to be who she wants to be. And this extends into the final stanza, stanza 6, and this is where the female persona is exploring all that life has to offer with her new-found freedom. Okay, so what is the poem's message? I believe it's twofold. I think the first part is that in Honor Killing, Dharker is warning people about the negative effects of placing expectations on people. So by having to live up to your cultural expectations or religious expectations or gender expectations or physical appearance expectations, this is an unhealthy thing that may cause a lot of stress and, as we'll explore in a bit, internal conflict. But I think the second half of the poem's message is really to inspire the reader and encourage them to free themselves from these identities. You don't have to identify with your country or culture. You don't have to identify with your religion. You don't have to identify with your gender. You don't have to identify with your physical bodily appearance. You can perhaps pursue who you are internally in your spirit, in your soul. So I believe the poem's message is twofold: a warning and an optimistic encouragement. So this poem is in our anthology of conflict. And where do we find conflict? Clearly there isn't any physical conflict such as war or guns or swords or death. But here we have internal conflict. So the female persona in Honor Killing by Dharker, whether you think it's Dharker herself or all oppressed women, she clearly wants to be free to be who she truly is internally. However, externally, she's receiving a lot of pressure from her culture, religion, gender, and physical appearance to behave in a certain way. So inside, the persona's not at peace. They want to be free and do their own thing, but externally, they have to behave in a certain way, and they feel trapped. So here we have internal conflict in the poem. So Dharker uses a range of techniques in this poem. Linguistically, she uses a lot of metaphors, and you can identify these metaphors as symbols, as being symbolic of things. We have use of colours and their connotations. We have alliteration to draw our attention to certain parts of the poem. We have oxymoron to create a sense of confusion, and we have listing. Structurally, the poem starts off with a fairly tight structure, and as the poem progresses, it loosens off. And at the start of the poem, we start externally with the coat, and as the poem progresses, we zoom in and get closer and closer to this persona until we actually enter her body, and we start exploring things like skin, face, flesh, and womb. Poetically, Dharker makes great use of anaphora, and that's repeating a line or a phrase. Volta, that's when there's a change in tone and emotion in the poem. Enjambment, that's when one line runs across many lines, it sort of speeds up the poem. Good use of tone, so that's the emotion behind the lines, and very good use of imagery, so that's trying to paint a memorable image in the reader's mind. So, I've labelled stanza 1 culture, and this stanza explores culture, expectations, and cultural identity. Starting off with the structure, you'll notice that stanza 1 is fairly tight. There's 7 lines, and in lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, you'll find 7-ish syllables. You'll even find some rhyme with mine in line 3 and design in line 5. So it's fairly tight, it's fairly controlled, and I believe this reflects how your culture and cultural expectations and cultural identity might control you as a person. It might control how you behave, how you speak, how you interact with others. So it's this idea that the persona is being controlled, and this is reflected in the poem's structure. And initially in stanza 1, we start outside of the persona. We start by looking at her coat, and that will get more and more internal, and we'll zoom in with each passing stanza. So, line 1, at last. Those first 2 words of the poem create quite a relieved tone. It's almost as if the persona has been carrying around this burden of cultural expectation for so long, and she's finally taking it off, and she can go, at last, I'm free of this. The next few words are I'm taking off, and this is an anaphora. This gets repeated across the first 4 stanzas. And this idea is that the persona has to remove expectations and remove identity in order to free herself. So what is she removing in stanza 1? Well, she's removing this coat, this black coat of a country. And here Dharker is comparing a coat to her country's cultural expectations or cultural identity. And this is a metaphor. And how I would write about this is I would say it's symbolic. Here the coat symbolizes cultural identity. Again, if you remember back to the poetic inspiration, you might say this is talking about Pakistani cultural identity, or if you're taking a wider approach, you could say this could represent any woman in any country who might feel oppressed by that country's expectations of her. So here we have colour connotations. The coat is a black coat, and when we think of the colour black, we might think of oppressive, maybe like dark black clouds. We might have negative connotations. And here, clearly Dharker is trying to give the impression that these cultural expectations placed on her have been having a negative effect on her persona. Dharker uses alliteration to draw our attention to this important line that has lots of features in it. We have the C sound in coat and country. This harsh consonant sound draws our attention to this line. We then have some enjambment a bit later in the stanza. I wore more out of habit than design. Enjambment, in my opinion, tends to speed up poems, and I think this is sort of showing how quick she wants to get rid of these cultural expectations and to free herself, to emancipate herself. Emancipate is a fancy way of saying free, and I think it's a really good word to use when you write about this poem. And finally, in the last line of stanza 1, the persona said, I believed I had no choice. She believed that she was born in her culture and she had to fulfill all of her cultural duties. She didn't realise she had a choice. It's quite a matter-of-fact tone. So in stanza 2, I've given it the subheading religion. And again, we have this fairly tight structure. We have 7 lines again. Lines 1, 2, 3 and 7 have 6-ish syllables. again, it reflects this idea that religion is maybe constraining her, tightening the persona, limiting her freedom. And we're zooming in. In stanza 1, we started off with a coat, but now we're zooming in on the face, on a veil. It's becoming more personal, more intimate. So we start stanza 2 with the anaphora, I'm taking off. Again, the persona is quite relieved to get rid of this religious expectation and this religious identity. And again, we have this metaphor. A veil is symbolizing faith or religion. And again, if you want to look at the poetic inspiration, you could argue that this is symbolizing the Muslim faith, Islam. Again, you could link that to maybe wearing a hijab, which is a religious expectation of that faith. Or you could maybe link this to wider religions and religions in general. Maybe you could look at Christianity and wearing the veil when you go and get married if you're a woman. We still have colour connotations. The veil is black. And again, if you take this Christian idea of marriage, the veil is normally white to symbolise purity. But in this poem, the veil is black. Again, these connotations of oppression, of depression, of darkness. Her faith has not treated her well. Her religion has not treated her well. And this is really expressed in the oxymoron, a faith that made me faithless. So faith is sort of believing in the unknown, and I think it's quite a positive thing. If you have faith in someone or something, that's usually quite positive. But here, her faith, whether you want to consider it Islam or Christianity or Hinduism or Judaism or whatever faith you want, has actually made her faithless. Instead of giving her that positive ability to believe in things, it's taken away her ability to believe in things. And I believe this has come from how religion has oppressed this female persona. So it's quite sad. Faith, which should be a positive thing, has had quite a negative effect on her. This is reinforced with a second oxymoron, which gave my God a devil's face. So again, God should be positive, a bit like faith, God that loves the world, that cares for you. However, through religion and all the rules that this persona has had to follow because of religion, maybe that's having an arranged marriage, or having to get married in the first place, or having to wear certain clothes, or having to pray certain times of the day, certain number of times. God, instead of being a positive face, God's face has been replaced with the devil's face, and the devil is evil. We see that in devil. If you remove the D, you get evil. So what should be positive, God, has been negative, has turned into something negative for this persona, which again is a really sad reality. Why has religion turned the persona so negative? Well, you need to look at the imagery. Religion has tied my mouth. It's quite a violent image of maybe having a gag put over your mouth or duct tape over your mouth to deny you freedom of speech, to deny you being able to express yourself. Again, go back to that poetic inspiration. The Pakistani woman who wanted a divorce, she went to her family and expressed that she wanted a divorce, but it's almost as if they tied her mouth. They silenced her. They killed her out of honor because they didn't want it to bring shame to their family. And this image of oppression is reinforced in the final line, muffled my own voice. It's this idea that religion has somehow put its hand over this female persona's mouth and has stopped her from being able to express herself and seek freedom. So here, religious expectation and religious identity has had a very negative effect on the persona, and she wants to get rid of it. Stanza 3 looks at gender, and here we see the structure loosening. So we don't have those 7 lines, we don't have any sort of attempt at controlling the syllables or attempt at rhyme. By now, the persona is experiencing some freedom. She's got rid of her cultural expectations, she's got rid of her religious expectations, and she's feeling freer, she's feeling more open, more loose, and this is reflected in the poem's structure. We are, however, still zooming in. In stanza 1, we started with the coat externally, and then we zoomed into the veil and the faith. We're now getting underneath that external layer of clothes, and we're focusing on underwear. these silks, these lacy things. So the underwear here is highly sexualized, silky, lacy. It gives the idea of lingerie. And this is symbolic, or this is a metaphor for her gender identity. And as we know, the persona in this poem is female. So she believes there's an expectation on her to feed dictator dreams. So the alliteration of the D sound and dictator dreams draws our attention to this idea. And a dictator is someone who has total rule over a country, and usually they've come to get that power by force. Some historical examples of dictators might include Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin. And if you know your history, you will know that those three names I just mentioned were all men. So it's this idea that men, these dictators who have power over women, maybe take that power by force, have dreams, maybe lustful dreams of how women should be and should behave, and that there's a gender expectation that this persona feels that she needs to live up to these dictators' sexualized dreams. But she wants to take off these sexy underwear, the silk, the lacy things. She wants to free herself from this gender expectation, this idea that she needs, or her purpose is to satisfy men. And we get reference to Mangal Sutra. This is to do with India and the Hindu culture. So if you remember, Dharker spends some time in India. She splits her time between Mumbai and London. And in the Hindu culture and tradition, when a woman gets married, she will wear Mangal Sutra, which is a gold and jewel encrusted necklace. And it's a sign that she's a married woman. In the West, we'll be more familiar with this idea of a ring, a wedding band that you put on the husband and wife's fingers, and that symbolizes their marriage. So here we've got jewelry that symbolizes marriage. The Mangal Sutra and the rings are a metaphor, a symbol for getting married. And normally, marriage should be a positive thing, a unity of two people who can support each other and help each other. But here, Dharker presents us with an image of marriage actually turning you into a beggar, making your situation in life worse. The Mangal Sutra and the rings rattling in a tin cup of needs that beggared me. Imagine a tin of beans or a tin of soup. You get rid of the beans or soup and you have that tin cup. And in the cup, you've put this necklace and your wedding rings, and you're like a beggar on the street. You're on your knees, you're rattling your cup, and you're trying to get people to help you. Now, I don't think the female persona here particularly wants financial help, but I think she wants freedom help. She wants people to help free her from this idea that she needs to please men and wear sexy underwear, or free her from this idea that she needs to get married and be a wife and be a mother. She wants freedom to be who she really is, and until she gets that freedom, she would feel beggared. And the verb beggared is very strong. It has connotations of being a beggar, being in a position of need, not being able to help yourself. You do also have the onomatopoeic rattling to sort of draw your attention to this image as well. The fourth stanza looks at the female persona's physical appearance. Again, we start with the anaphora I'm taking off. She wants to get rid of physical appearance identity and physical appearance expectation. But if you look at the overall structure of this stanza, it's very, very loose. Gone are the 7 lines. Gone is any sense of rhyme. It's really freeing at this stage. The persona has got rid of her cultural identity, her religious identity, and her gender identity, and she's feeling much freer, and this is reflected in the structure of the poem. However, we are zooming closer in to the persona, and I find this quite uncomfortable. So we started off with the coat, then the veil, then we got to underwear, and now we're looking at a biological level. The persona wants to take off her skin. Maybe this means she doesn't want to be defined by her skin colour, whether that's black, brown, white. She doesn't want to be identified by a race. She wants to be identified by who she is on the inside, her spirit, her soul, her personality. She then wants to remove her face, and I find this image really uncomfortable, this idea of skinning, of peeling off skin, or flaying, cutting away the skin of a human. I think she wants to remove her face because people tend to look at your face when they talk to you and make judgments about you. Are you beautiful? Are you ugly? Are you attractive? Are you unattractive? And I think by removing her face, Dharker and the persona is encouraging people to look beyond the surface and into someone. What's their personality, their spirit, their soul like? And that's how you should judge someone, not how they look externally. The persona wants to remove her flesh. Now, when you think of humanity and humankind, you think of flesh and bone. So I would argue that by getting rid of her flesh, the persona wants to get rid of her humanity. She probably doesn't even want to identify as human anymore. She just wants to identify as who she truly is. She wants to identify as her own unique individual. She doesn't even want to be tied down to a species like the human species. And finally, we're going into organs. We've got skin, and now we've got sexual organs. We've got the womb. And women are biologically wired to have children, but by removing the womb, the persona is removing her ability to have a child. And I think this is to do with the expectation that women should be mothers and wives, and she doesn't want any expectations on her whatsoever. She just wants to be completely free to find out who she truly is and explore the world and express herself in the world. And here we sort of have a biological list: skin, face, flesh, womb. And again, we have the metaphor that these 4 biological parts of the human body, they symbolize the persona's physical appearance. Now, structurally speaking, in stanzas 1, 2, 3, and 4, we've started off with the anaphora, I'm taking off. This gives the impression that the persona is oppressed by expectations and identity, and she finds the need to remove them. But there is a clear shift between stanza 4 and 5, and we call that change in tone a volta, and it becomes decidedly more positive in stanzas 5 and 6. So I've given stanzas 5 and 6 the subheading freedom, and we have this volta, which is symbolized by a change in tone. The pessimistic tone of needing to get rid of cultural, religious, gender, and physical identity and expectation is gone. The persona is now free. She uses a positive anaphora, let's see. It has quite an exploratory tone. She's optimistic about the future. Let's see what I am in here when I squeeze past the easy cage of bone. Think of the imagery here, a cage of bone. That is a rib cage. And what does the rib cage house? Your heart and your lungs. And I think here we have an image of the female persona's heart breaking out of the rib cage. Maybe the rib cage symbolizes a prison, like a cage, and maybe the bones of the rib cage are made from cultural identity, religious identity, gender identity, physical identity. And maybe the heart symbolizes her true identity, her spirit, her soul, which is now squeezed past the prison of her bones, of the expectations, and is now free to soar and roam in the world. If you think back to that zooming in effect of the structure, we started with the coat, the veil, the underwear, and then the skin and the organs. We're now actually inside the body, we're inside the rib cage, and I think we're going back outwards now. The heart, or the spirit, which I think it symbolizes, is breaking free of the body and is looking external. It's looking to explore, it's optimistic, there's freedom here. And this is continued into the final stanza, stanza 6. Again, we have this positive anaphora, let's see, it's very optimistic. Let's see what I am out here making, crafting, plotting. We have a triple here. We have a list of participles ending in ing, and they're all to do with taking control of your future, of your destiny. The persona is making her future. She's crafting a life for herself. She's plotting what she wants to achieve in the future. There's this sense that she now has freedom, she has control over her life. It's much more positive. And again, if you want to look at this idea of her heart breaking free from her ribcage and looking outwards and soaring, the final word of the poem is geography. And to me, this implies like the atlas or the globe, and it's this idea that she can explore. She's now free from all these expectations and identities. She can do what she wants and live up to her true potential. And again, I find this is quite similar to Dharker's story, because she was born in Pakistan, raised in Scotland, splits her time between London and India. So I would argue that the persona could be Imtiaz Dharker herself, but I would also accept that it could represent any woman feeling oppressed by her situation and wanting to break free. So, what can you do to solidify your learning of Honour Killing by Imtiaz Dharker? Well, you could make notes from this video on a physical copy of the poem. That would be a good start. And then secondly, you could answer this question. How does Dharker explore internal conflict in honour killing? I would suggest the following structure. You start with an introduction, and maybe you explain about Dharker and her multicultural past and present. You might want to talk about the poem's message and what internal conflict means. You could then move on to some of the interesting language Dharker uses. I'd definitely focus on the metaphors and the symbolism, but if you want to support that with some alliteration and oxymoron, that might be a good idea. I would then move on to the structure and say how the poem starts off controlled, and this links to how expectations and identity can control you. But as the persona emancipates, frees herself, the poetic structure also frees and loosens up to reflect that. You may want to include some poetic specific devices. I would definitely focus on the anaphora and how the volta in between stanzas 4 and 5 changes the tone of the poem from pessimistic to optimistic. And then I'd write some kind of conclusion. How does Dharker explore internal conflict in honour killing? Well, there you have it. If you found this video useful for your poetry revision, please give it a like. Please also subscribe to my Mr. Hardy YouTube channel for more poetry analysis. And please leave a comment with the next poem from the OCR conflict anthology you would like me to explain. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.